This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you in part by Telex, the interconnection company, owners and operators of 56 Marietta, the most network-rich co-location facility in the Southeast. Tag TV and Tag Radio. Technology now has a voice of innovation and information. Get it on www.tagtvonline.com. Innovation, now more than ever, will bring to our state's economy new products, new services, and in the future, new jobs, not just from the large deals where rapidly growing startups or early-stage developing companies find multi-million-dollar funding, but the newly conceived ideas where entrepreneurs take huge risks, use the resources of their own money and that of family and friends, yet still need more to bring their concepts from idea to reality. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, January 5th, 2010, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. I'm your guest host, Frank Baia. Angel investment tax credit legislation comes to the Capitol this coming Monday, and the technology community is uniting to make this legislation's importance known to our government representatives. Up to the Tech Talk and reaching out to the greater technology, business, and economic development communities is Knox Massey, managing partner at Keith-Massey Family Investments. From 2002 to 2009, Keith served as managing director of the Atlanta Technology Angels, where he managed the initial funding of over 20 companies. Former senior executive at America Online, at West Wayne Advertising Agency, and regional offices of the New York Times, Knox serves on the Angel Capital Association and the Atlanta Technology Angels Board of Directors. Angel investors, personal, private capital to fund entrepreneurs with startup companies to create high-paying jobs that generate tax revenue for the state. At a competitive disadvantage, Georgia competes with 21 other states, including North Carolina, Louisiana, and Arkansas, who already have tax incentive programs for angel investment. Tech Talk turns to the need to encourage individual private capital to invest in Georgia's future as we speak with technology community leader, successful angel investor, and angel tax investment credit advocate, Knox Massey. Knox, welcome to Tech Talk.
Thank you very much.
Well, extremely interesting subject today, obviously one that could dramatically impact over the long haul of economic development. Certainly a lot of new initiatives in entrepreneurism and a lot of startups in terms of venture capital. But let's talk a little bit about this particular legislation and maybe give us kind of a general, as we say, a 40,000-foot level kind of look at it. What's it all about?
Sure. This is an angel tax credit that we are proposing for this year's legislative session. And a small group of us have been working on this since, probably 2005. And back in 2005, I was associated and have been associated with the Angel Capital Association, which is a trade association, about 175 angel groups throughout the nation, through my work here in Atlanta with the Atlanta Technology Angels. And as I started to meet people throughout the nation that ran groups similar to the Atlanta Technology Angels, I realized that a lot of these states had tax credits for early-stage investors. And so as I learned a little bit more about it, starting back in 2005, I started researching more and more and got a small group of investors here in town interested in it, and we did more and more research and actually approached the legislative session back in 2007, but now we've got much greater resources, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Well, let's get in a little bit about, obviously that kind of gives us a chronology as far as how the initiative basically got started, but, you just mentioned, maybe get into a little bit about what does it, beyond the obvious, and that is a tax credit, so obviously there's some financial incentive to do this.
Sure.
But what does it represent to an angel, and why would this make a difference? One thing for sure that you've commented on is that we've got to be competitive, obviously on so many levels. I know one of the things just recently was a tax incentive package that was done by the entertainment and film industry that's been a radical success as far as generating a lot of activity in that particular industry sector. But maybe go into, for our listening audience, what this would potentially look like if it were successful.
Well, first of all, it benefits both the investor and the young companies or young entrepreneurs here in Georgia. It helps incent the investors by giving them some sort of incentive whereby it, in essence, rewards them for investing in these young companies. And for the entrepreneurs themselves, it would incent or increase the amount, we think it would increase the amount dramatically of private capital, not venture capital, and not state-generated capital, but private capital from individuals into young companies throughout the state of Georgia. We've got a nice different groups in Georgia, in Atlanta, in Augusta, Athens, Gainesville, Savannah, that have formalized the process over the years, and it just makes sense for economic development and the state of Georgia to get more involved and to incent these people to invest in these young companies.
Well, and you commented about some of the outlying areas, some of the cities that sometimes we forget how much activity is actually going on, Augusta and Savannah, and I don't know if you mentioned Columbus, but certainly they're included in it, and several others. But what about organizations? Who's involved as far as the community at large, as far as the technology community is concerned, or the community at large in general?
In terms of the actual groups themselves?
Yeah, as far as the legislation, who's involved?
Well, in terms of legislation, all the groups are working together to push this legislation, which actually the session starts next week. And so there's a group of us here in Atlanta that just happened to start the initiative, but we've pulled in other parts of the state because it's not just Atlanta that's going to benefit.
Right.
That's a small part. It's the state of Georgia that's going to benefit, and many of these other states are very cognizant of that. It's a North Carolina tax credit bill. It's a Louisiana tax credit bill. It's a Virginia tax credit bill. So it's for the good of the state.
So, and in that regard, I mean, I guess I might have confused you in terms of the point I was making. Obviously, I get the idea that it's a statewide economic development benefit. Sure. Because the startups, innovation is, we often say as far as TAG is concerned, that innovation's in our DNA. But arguably, with the innovation centers, with some of the other activities that are going on a statewide, biomedical, health sciences, logistics, good grief. I mean, you could not name a city which one would guess there's some level of innovation going on. And, of course, now with the broadband initiative and so many other things that are allowing everywhere to be everywhere, and as far as that goes, the cities kind of don't make any difference. We've been saying no borders for a long period of time.
Right, exactly.
But the other side of it is now what are you're obviously calling for unification as it relates to bringing together maybe what would not necessarily, well, I don't know, go into a little bit about. The question I was asking is, who are the actual people that are helping you now as far as spreading the word or putting the message out,
Well, there's, of course, TAG, Technology Association of Georgia, has been very gracious in putting their resources behind it. You've got some groups within the state of Georgia, the angel groups in Atlanta, Columbus, Savannah, Gainesville, Augusta. You've got numerous entrepreneurs. For example, our group here in Atlanta, the Atlanta Technology Angels, which I'm still affiliated with, invested in over 40 companies in the last 10 years. And so what we'll do is we'll pull many of the entrepreneurs of those companies that have grown from maybe 1 or 2 employees to 50, 75, 100 employees, and also have them contribute as well. Chuck Martin is going to drop the bill for us hopefully in next week. So he's very, very involved. There's some folks doing some pro bono work. Miller Martin is doing some drafting for us for the bill. So there's a great team that is formed throughout the state to push this forward.
And I'm sure that for most of our technology members in our audience that are listening today, they understand the difference in terms of level of various forms of fundraising or investment. But maybe just take 1 second and talk about the difference of what it means to be an angel level or an angel investor.
Sure. Angel investor is somewhat of a media term, but what it typically means these days is generally when a young company gets started, big technology or any other type of young company, they'll fund themselves early on. So it's their personal funds. The entrepreneurs will put in their personal funds. And then often after that, if they need to raise more capital, it'll be friends or family. And then generally right above that is where the angel investors come in, and it's their private capital that bridges the gap between the friends and family and often the venture capital or maybe the banks. And so there's a huge gap in between what the entrepreneurs or the founders can do to start the company and where the VCs, as the venture capital funds are moving to a much later stage in a company's progress, there's been an increasing gap, and the angels can come in and have shown nationwide that they can come in and fill that gap until the company either becomes profitable or goes on to that next level if they need venture capital or other type of capital.
Would you say that that is really at the early stage, the core of early innovation? I mean, obviously, I'm going to assume that at that level, high risk?
Yes, it can be assumed to be a fairly high risk, but most of the investors...
But correspondingly with the high risk, you're allowing some great ideas to have an opportunity to evolve that may never have a chance to see the light of day.
That's true, but the investors doing this understand the high risk and are generally comfortable with it and want to encourage it. I mean, a lot of times they'll be the first capital into a intellectual property out of a university, or maybe it's a couple of young guys right out of college that don't have a lot of funds they can use to start a company, and so they'll bring in an angel investor to help fund the company from the very, very beginning. I mean, we funded, meaning ATA, which I'm still on the board of, funded companies, the first capital in, or have come in at a later stage, and many of these other angel groups have tended to go back and forth, but still it's very, very early stage, yes.
And one would, again, thinking in terms of the current economic, I kind of refer to it as the recent unpleasantry, but the current economic situation, and in a mentality that says all boats rise, in order for Georgia to remain competitive, I would submit that this is probably crucial, absolutely critical, that this area of this vertical of the funding and investment portion of the industry, I guess it's an industry, obviously, is an absolute necessity. And so I would call out to any of our listeners, and maybe you can tell us, what can we do now, especially at this late date with things pretty much coming to a climax over the next week or so.
Sure.
But what can we do to help you or to help the movement to get this situation improved?
Sure. I would say contact Technology Association of Georgia. And, of course, they can always contact myself or Mike Eckert if they know us. You could probably contact the Atlanta Technology Angels. Gordon Rogers is now running that. He's pretty accessible. If they know the other angel groups within the state, Savannah or Columbus, they can contact those. So really, we're pretty accessible. We'd love to have any help we can get. The session starts next week, and we'll be moving fast and furious. But, as you also mentioned, the competitive issue is one of the key issues here. 22 states have it. In fact, North Carolina has one. It's been around for about 10 years. They generate between 600 and 700 jobs each year, which they track. So over the last year, they've probably generated, 6,000 or 7,000 jobs, which once you put into the multiplier effect where these companies grow, it's probably twice or three times that.
Well, and it's also some of the indirect benefit where something like a particular startup creates even more of inbound investment, or
That's right.
Like in the gaming field or something like that. I mean, just a few years ago, that segment would have almost been considered exotic or not really taken very seriously, and now it's one of the fastest growing niches that are happening. And beyond that, it's beyond gaming. It's now getting involved in virtualization of even private sector enterprise and some of the other things that are drifting into it. So
that's correct.
The importance of it is just, I'll call it layers and tentacles. Well, once again, we're talking about the angel tax credit. And what is the actual formal name of the legislation, or does it have a...
It's still being drafted.
Okay.
We should know that by the end of the week. But
it's primarily...
Once it's settled, we will distribute that, and we'll have a formal.
Okay, and the best way is not to go direct to any of the actual legislators themselves, but to go through the organization? You're recommending that they contact you or contact through TAG so that we do it as a group? Or
yes,
you mentioned Chuck Martin.
What we'd like to do is once we hit the end of the week and have the final details ironed out, show that you're interested, and then we'll come back and contact and give directions as the best way to contact your legislator.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to show the influence, the importance when we put our minds to it. I think one of the things that I often hear in political campaigns is that the two greatest issues is I don't know and I don't care. And so hopefully people now know, and they and they will care, and they'll get behind you and start giving you information or making contact. Again, we've been visiting with Knox Massey. The issue is angel investor tax credit. It's a legislation that's coming up pretty relatively soon, the next week or so.
Monday.
Monday. Okay, well, then we've got to act, and we've got to act soon. Knox, thank you so much for for all you do and what you're doing with this movement and the things you've done in the past, but also thank you for joining us today on Tech Talk.
Thank you.